Okay, so blood got sent towards the brain, right? That had oxygen and carbon dioxide in it. And then what happens is your neurons are going to use the oxygen. I said oxygen and carbon dioxide. I'm sorry, oxygen and nutrients. The oxygen and nutrients are used by your cells in order to make energy. And as a result, they actually make waste products. So those waste products then have to be removed from the body. Primarily, waste products are removed by the urinary system, but the respiratory system also removes carbon dioxide, which is considered a waste product. So in order to remove those waste products, we have to use a different blood vessel system, sort of like freeways. You know, you can only go one direction on the freeway unless you're a celebrity who accidentally took too much alcohol or drugs or something, and you go the wrong way. But the same with blood. You're going to send stuff in one direction and send other stuff in an opposite direction. You don't want to have those two directional flows happening at the same time. So we're going to remove waste products and also maybe pick up a couple other things, which we'll learn about later, in a system of veins instead. Okay. Veins are usually more superficially located. So like when you look at your wrist and you see the blue, or if you see like blood vessels popping out of somebody's muscles, those are all veins because arteries actually run deeper than veins. Usually they run underneath, but sometimes they run even deeper inside underneath muscle and stuff like that. So we're going to see that in the head and the neck region, really in the brain region, what we're going to find is a lot of superficial veins that are actually draining all of the waste products from around the brain. There's going to be a series of veins, and these series of veins are called the dural venous sinuses. They are called sinuses because they are large and flat veins, just like your sinuses are actually large, flat pockets in different bone areas. So the largest one and the most superficial one is found right inside of the longitudinal fissure and will basically run in the dura mater, and this large one is going to be called the superior sagittal sinus. So I'm going to make it nice and like big right there so that you can see that. That's sagittal. Okay. Just underneath that, that also kind of arcs right about like that. I think superior sagittal sinus probably comes down a little bit more. There's going to be an inferior sagittal sinus. And what these two things are going to be held in is they're actually going to be held in a membrane, which is the dura mater, and this actual membrane is called the falx cerebri. Or cerebri, okay? Then what's going to happen is blood is going to drain from the superior sagittal sinus and in the inferior sagittal sinus into a common place, which is going to be called the straight sinus right there. Okay. And then the straight sinus is actually going to branch right and left. So the straight sinus will be right over the cerebellum. And this is going to branch right and left and come more lateral this way, kind of where the ears and the eye are located. And that becomes the transverse sinus. Oops. Sinus, not same. Okay. Then it's going to start to dip. And when it dips and kind of curves downward, this becomes the sigmoid sinus. Just like that. Then the sigmoid sinus is going to drain blood into a large blood vessel in the neck called the internal jugular vein. So this is not science anymore. This is now a vein. At the base of the sella turcica, which is right here, you'll have a large open area, maybe right there, kind of going all around. And that's actually going to drain in this direction too, into the sigmoid sinus. This is the cavernous sinus. That one's going to be really important in 2240 when we talk about how hormones get into blood. They get into blood because they actually are drained into the cavernous sinus. So you can come over here and you can also see, I forgot one other membrane. So one other membrane is going to be kind of more laterally situated, and this is the tentorium cerebelli. That's going to hold the transverse sinuses in place laterally. So I have my coloring page over here to kind of help give you some reference. So veins and arteries usually run parallel to each other, but sometimes they don't always have the same names when they run parallel to each other. So usually they do, but sometimes they don't. So on this coloring page here, we see some superficial veins that are actually draining the head and the neck area. And then we see this inside of the skull. That's the transverse sinus leading to the sigmoid sinus right there. And I'm just going to abbreviate transverse sinus, sigmoid sinus. Okay. Once the sigmoid sinus goes through the jugular foramen, right, you're going to see that this really super large vein that runs parallel here to the hyoid and the larynx and then to the trachea, which is labeled number 6. This is internal jugular. So I want you to kind of superimpose this picture over the one I did previously. Basically, internal jugular is running parallel right there to common carotid, and then eventually comes up into the skull like that. So it's going to run parallel to common carotid, then common carotid branches, and internal jugular and internal carotid run parallel until they diverge into separate openings into the skull. Okay. And then internal jugular actually feeds back into subclavian, brachiocephalic, sort of depends on kind of where you think that is branching from. But basically what that means is the heart is right there and you're dumping blood back into the heart. Along with a vertebral artery, there is a vertebral vein that also goes into the foramen magnum, and it also helps to drain the back portion of the brain a little bit more. It will go through some of these sinuses, but that's a little less important for you guys to know. These sinuses are more important in case you ever see a patient who gets into some sort of problem where they have head trauma and they have a subdermal hematoma. They can just have like a hematoma where they break the blood vessels on top of the brain, or they can actually do subdermal to hematoma where they break the blood vessels underneath the dura mater, which means you have a lot more blood pushing on the brain, causing more problems. Okay. So if I give you this picture, I don't know if I expect you to be able to draw that. That's actually, it takes a lot of practice to be able to kind of draw and label that, but I would maybe give you a picture for you to label, and I don't know, coloring page is quite possible, but probably not in all likelihood. Something that is already found within your check your understanding portion of the PowerPoint here. Okay. So now hopefully you have some better understanding of like one, the brain itself, the different parts, and like maybe helping you create your own little visual map of brain functions, as well as helping you figure out how to draw arterial supply and venous drainage so that you understand how blood gets to the brain and how blood is removed from the brain. And I want you to think about this in terms of, for arteries, if you stop supplying parts of the brain, you know, what functions is that going to affect, right? What functionality can you affect? If you don't have venous drainage, that can also affect functionality, but a lot of it is going to be more that you're going to have probably problems with like compressing the brain instead of not getting enough oxygen or nutrients, which could still cause the same problems of functionality problems anyway. So I hope this one also helps you guys with some of the last stuff in the class.